The biblical story is quite interesting because it actually mentions several kings fought for the asphalt, which could have been the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah.
A 5-foot thick layer of ash and rubble, pottery melted into glass, human bones shattered into tiny fragments. This is what archaeologists found buried under the sands of modern-day Jordan. For years, they couldn't explain the sheer violence of the destruction.
There are only two sources that can generate that kind of temperature profile that we know of. One, of course, would be an atomic bomb. The other one is either a meteoritic impact event or an airburst event.
The heat required was hotter than any volcano. The shockwave was powerful enough to level a palace. Now, a team of scientists has pieced together the evidence revealing an event that mirrors the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah. An ancient city, annihilated in a flash of fire from above, has finally been found. The smoking gun from the sky. In the sun-scorched plains of the Jordan Valley, northeast of the Dead Sea, lies a massive ancient mound known as Tal el-Hammam. For years, archaeologists methodically excavated this site, peeling back layers of history. They knew a great Bronze Age city once stood here, a hub of civilization for thousands of years. But as they dug deeper, to a layer dating back around 3,650 years ago, something was terribly wrong. Civilization here didn't fade away. It didn't decline. It ended. Instantly. You see, what they uncovered was a dark, chaotic layer of destruction about 5 feet thick. Archaeologists call this the destruction layer, and it was unlike anything they had ever seen. The evidence was, to put it mildly, apocalyptic. They found pottery fragments that had been melted into glass, something that requires temperatures hotter than 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, far hotter than a regular fire or even a volcanic eruption. Building walls made of mud bricks, some several feet thick, were gone. It wasn't that they had collapsed, it was as if they had been pulverized by an unimaginable force from one direction. The most shocking fact is that the stones of the palace foundation were cracked and scorched. Then they found the human remains. The skeletons were not whole. Instead, they were in a state of what scientists call extreme disarticulation and fragmentation. Bones were shattered into tiny pieces, mixed in with ash and the debris of collapsed buildings. This wasn't the result of an orderly conflict or a simple fire. This was evidence of a high-energy, high-pressure event that tore people apart in an instant. For years, the team, led by archaeologist Dr. Stephen Collins, was baffled. What could have caused this? An earthquake wouldn't generate this kind of heat. A war wouldn't melt pottery into glass. The answer came not from digging in the dirt, but from looking at the sky. A team of 21 scientists, including archaeologists, geologists, and impact experts, analyzed the evidence. They discovered something mind-blowing in the soil samples. They found tiny spherical grains of iron and silica, as well as shocked quartz, crystals of quartz that have been fractured in a unique pattern that only forms under immense, sudden pressure. The thing nobody tells you is that shocked quartz is a telltale sign of a high-velocity impact, like a meteor strike. Believe it or not, they also found microscopic diamonds, or nanodiamonds, which can form when the carbon in plants and wood is subjected to extreme heat and pressure almost instantly. Putting it all together, the team came to a single, terrifying conclusion. Around 1650 BC, a small asteroid or comet, traveling at over 38,000 miles per hour, entered the Earth's atmosphere over the Jordan Valley. It exploded a few miles above Tal el-Hammam in a massive cosmic airburst. The blast was at least 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic device that leveled Hiroshima. In a flash, the city and everything for miles around was obliterated. The air temperature briefly skyrocketed to over 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit, vaporizing anyone and anything in its path. A massive shockwave, moving faster than the speed of sound, followed, leveling every building and turning the city into rubble. The explosion was so powerful it even splashed super salty water from the Dead Sea across the entire valley, poisoning the soil for centuries and making it impossible to grow crops. A once fertile plain became a wasteland overnight. This catastrophic event perfectly explains the melted pottery, the pulverized buildings, and the shattered human remains. It was a cosmic event of biblical proportions. And many people are crazy about the idea that this might not just be a scientific discovery, it might be the scientific explanation for one of the most famous stories ever told, the destruction of Sodom. But was Tal el-Hammam truly the infamous city of sin? In the shadow of the Dead Sea, long before archaeologists dug in the dirt, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah was etched into the pages of the book of Genesis. These were two of the 5 cities of the plain, described as being located in a valley so lush and well-watered that it was compared to the garden of the Lord. This was a prosperous region, a center of trade and wealth, but as the story goes, the inhabitants had become deeply corrupt and their cities were filled with unseemly acts. The biblical narrative is stark and terrifying. In Genesis chapter 19, it says, "Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven." The destruction was absolute. It wiped out the cities, all the inhabitants, and everything that grew on the land. The only thing Abraham could see from a distance was dense smoke rising from the plain, like the smoke of a furnace. This story has served for millennia as a powerful warning about divine judgment and the consequences of moral decay. For centuries, however, that's all it was, a story. Scholars and explorers debated its historical accuracy. Was it a factual account, an allegory, or a myth created to explain some long-forgotten natural disaster? The search for the physical location of Sodom and Gomorrah became a kind of holy grail for biblical archaeologists. The Bible provided clues. The cities were in the Jordan Plain, visible from Hebron and near the Dead Sea. Early theories suggested the ruins were submerged beneath the southern waters of the Dead Sea, which is, believe it or not, the lowest point on the surface of the earth. Explorers in the 19th century reported seeing the outlines of what looked like submerged forests and even buildings under the salty, buoyant water. But these claims were never confirmed, and subsequent underwater explorations found nothing. Another popular candidate was a site called Bab-ish-Drah, an ancient town on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. Excavations there revealed a large settlement that was abandoned and burned, but the timeline and the nature of its destruction didn't quite fit the biblical account. It seemed to have been a slower, more conventional collapse. The mystery deepened. What many overlooked was that the Bible's description of the region's fertility seemed to contradict the barren, salty landscape we see today. Genesis describes it as a paradise, but the modern Dead Sea area is one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. This discrepancy was a real head-scratcher. What could have transformed a garden into a desolate wasteland? This question led archaeologists to look further north in the Jordan Valley to a place that was once just as fertile as the Bible described. That place was Tal el-Hammam. Dr. Collins and his team began digging there precisely because its location and archaeological record seemed to be a perfect match for the biblical Sodom. It was a massive, strategically important city that dominated the region during the Bronze Age, just as Sodom was said to have. And as we now know, its end was not slow or conventional. It was sudden, fiery, and complete. The scientific evidence of an airburst provided the missing piece of the puzzle. It explained not only the city's instant obliteration, but also how the once fertile valley was rendered sterile for up to 600 years by a blast of Dead Sea salt. It was as if science had finally found a physical event that matched the biblical description of divine fury. So how do the scientific details line up with the biblical text? Fire and brimstone decoded. The connection between the Tal el-Hammam airburst and the biblical account of Sodom is where things get truly fascinating. It's not just a loose theory. The parallels are incredibly specific. Let's break down exactly what the Bible says and compare it to what the scientists found. You can see this everywhere in the evidence. First, the fire from heaven. Genesis explicitly states that fire rained down out of the heaven. For ancient people with no concept of astrophysics, a meteor exploding in the atmosphere would be the perfect real-world event to describe this way. The resulting fireball would have been brighter than the sun, and the searing heat wave that followed would have felt like a wave of fire washing over the land. Witnesses on the ground would have seen a terrifying light in the sky, followed by a rain of fire. Second, the brimstone, or sulfur. The Bible says the Lord rained down brimstone and fire. While large deposits of sulfur weren't found directly in the destruction layer, the region around the Dead Sea is rich in sulfur. It's possible the massive explosion and shockwave vaporized or disturbed these deposits, sending sulfurous material into the air along with the fire, creating the rain of brimstone described by survivors. Some researchers even propose that the impacting object itself, a type of asteroid known as a carbonaceous chondrite, could have contained sulfur, which would have been dispersed during the explosion. The most shocking fact is that the airburst itself would have created a plume of smoke and debris that would look exactly like the dense smoke of a furnace that Abraham saw. Third, the utter destruction of everything that grew on the land. This is a crucial detail. A normal fire or an earthquake doesn't typically sterilize the soil for centuries, but the airburst theory explains this perfectly. The blast wave, as mentioned, would have slammed into the Dead Sea, which is about 25% salt, nearly 10 times saltier than the ocean. It would have vaporized the top layers of water and blasted a fine mist of super-concentrated brine across the entire southern Jordan Valley. This sudden massive increase in salinity would have made the land completely infertile, just as the Bible describes. The garden was turned into a salt flat in a matter of minutes. Fourth, the fate of Lot's wife. The story says she looked back at the city and was turned into a pillar of salt. While this sounds purely miraculous, some scientists have offered a potential, albeit grim, explanation. Anyone close enough to the blast would have been hit by the superheated thermal wave. It's possible her body was instantly incinerated by the extreme heat, and then her remains were coated by the rain of salt that the explosion blasted from the Dead Sea. To a horrified survivor viewing from a distance, it might have appeared as if she had been transformed into a salt-encrusted statue. The thing is, the pieces fit together so well it's hard to dismiss it as a coincidence. The science doesn't disprove the biblical story. For many, it provides a powerful mechanism for how it could have happened. It takes an event that seemed purely mythological and grounds it in a terrifyingly real cosmic phenomenon. But this leads to the biggest question. Are we missing something? A warning, written in ash. So, a cosmic airburst likely destroyed an ancient city, and the event was so traumatic that it was preserved for thousands of years in the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Many people are crazy about this connection, but the implications are much bigger than just solving an ancient mystery. It speaks directly to us today. People watching this are probably wondering, did this all happen overnight? Was it a complete surprise? The answer is yes. For the 35,000 to 50,000 people living in the city and its surrounding region, it was a normal day that ended in a flash of light. The thing is, are we missing a key detail in our own time? We live our lives assuming the ground beneath our feet is stable and the sky above us is safe. But the story of Tal el-Hammam is a stark reminder that this isn't always true. Scientists who study near-Earth objects, or NEOS, warn that impacts like the one that leveled this ancient city are not a matter of if, but when. The 1908 Tunguska event in Siberia, which flattened 800 square miles of forest, was a cosmic airburst very similar to the one proposed for Sodom. Had that happened over New York or London, millions would have perished. The most shocking fact is that astronomers estimate that there are thousands of asteroids and comets in our solar system whose orbits cross Earth's path. We've only discovered a fraction of them. An object just a few hundred feet across, the estimated size of the Tal el-Hammam impactor, could destroy a major metropolitan area. It's a real head-scratcher that we spend so much on earthly conflicts, yet so little on planetary defense systems that could protect us from a threat that could erase a city in an instant. What many overlooked in the Sodom story for centuries was the possibility that it wasn't just a moral tale, but a preserved memory of a genuine cataclysm. A warning passed down through generations. Ancient people didn't have the language of science to describe an asteroid impact, so they used the language they had. Divine judgment, fire from heaven, the wrath of God. Perhaps the sin of Sodom was simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or perhaps for believers, the asteroid was the instrument of a divine plan. The evidence is compelling, but does explaining the how of Sodom's destruction take away its spiritual meaning, or does it make it even more terrifyingly real? Let us know. Like and subscribe.